Anyway, we're going to start with a little bit meditation, as we usually do. I'll guide a little bit meditation. We'll start about 15 minutes of meditation and then we'll go into the class. So let's just take a moment to settle into our position, meditation position. Just taking a couple of deep breaths. Allowing the breath just to flow all the way through the body and mind. And as we exhale, just letting go anything that's not serving us in this meditation for this evening, maybe any kind of busy energy. You're just trying to allow that to leave through our nostrils, through our pores, and settle into the class with some clarity, more attention. So what helps with that, again, is the 9-round breathing exercise. We can do that, or you can simply just breathe with the breath for a couple of minutes at the tip of the nostrils, if that's more effective for you, just to bring the mind here, bring the awareness and attention here. So I'm going to do the 9-round breathing. And then, breathing 3 times through both different nostrils, holding the opposite finger, the first finger of the opposite hand, covering up the nostril, inhaling through one, exhaling through the other. And finally, 3 inhalations and exhalations through both nostrils. In that space, taking a moment to connect with, first thought, first feeling, what comes to mind with our motivation this evening for coming, what inspired us to join class. So on top of your own motivation, just for a moment reflecting on refuge. As we discussed last week, refuge is not something unfamiliar to us. It's not an unfamiliar territory, an unfamiliar practice that we've done in our lives. We've taken refuge. We take refuge in our lives, in our days and moments, many times. We've leaned on, relied and entrusted ourselves, many aspects of life through family, parents, friends, careers. We've leaned on these to try and bring about a certain level of peace, satisfaction, happiness in our lives. All beings, like ourselves, we have this deep inner need, desire for happiness. And as you know, His Holiness, all the Lamas say, that's right. You know, we deserve happiness. Our nature, our deepest nature, is everlasting peace and happiness. So we do need to connect with that kind of innate feeling we have, that innate desire. But up until now, you know, in a limited way, we haven't really been able to connect with a source of refuge that's brought about a sort of deeper level of peace and happiness and satisfaction. We haven't been able to really find an everlasting mental peace because all these external objects of refuge that we've leaned on and trusted ourselves to, what we sort of explored last week, the 8 worldly concerns, they have their limitations. From their own side, they don't have the ability or power to bring us peace and happiness. So there's been a recognition already on our side. That's why we engage in a spiritual practice. We come to hear spiritual teachings to find another source of refuge out of some anxiety or a sort of kind of connection with that dissatisfaction we have, dukkha, that we're all under the control of. Dukkha in Sanskrit means suffering. It's this theme of dissatisfaction that's sort of throughout our lives we're experiencing. To a certain degree, we've connected with that theme of suffering, that theme of dissatisfaction in our lives. So we seek out another source of refuge, spiritual teaching, spiritual teachers, spiritual community. So as Lama Yeshe said, that's a good thing. That's a level of, it's the start of the spiritual path. It's the start of this mind that we sometimes talk about, renunciation, you know, renouncing worldly objects, affairs, matters, to seek a deeper inner refuge, a deeper spiritual practice, to become an inner being. To understand the deep psychology of our own minds, how our minds work, and how the causes of suffering and happiness ultimately come from how we think and how we learn to transform our mind. You know, it all comes through the kind of the place, the environment of the mind and heart. That's where the deepest source and treasure of happiness lies. But to understand this, to kind of train our mind, guide our mind in that direction, we need a qualified teacher who understands the deep workings of the mind and who's developed all the qualities and levels of happiness that's possible to achieve. And we need valid teachings, faultless teachings from that teacher. So we too can train in those qualities. And we also need, you know, a spiritual community, a Sangha, friends, helpers on the path, to inspire us, give us strength, and a more immediate assistance, you know, how to develop the trainings in our own heart and mind. So all three are equally important. So the purpose of this course is to go into the qualities, you know, understanding refuge, the practice of refuge, how we develop it in our heart and minds more deeply, and understanding the three qualities of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha that we seek refuge in. So to begin the class, as we do with any, you know, when we go to any teaching in this tradition, mostly we start with this practice of refuge, you know, connecting with our sources of inspiration and trying to receive the blessing, the qualities, and you just wake up our mind a little bit to be able to receive and more deeply understand whatever we're going to hear, you know. So this refuge prayer, all these prayers have a power to kind of move the mind in the direction of the teachings, move the mind with a certain type of sort of inspiration, openness towards the teaching. So let's just take a moment to feel the presence, just imagining the kind of spontaneous presence of Shakyamuni Buddha in the space before us, just as we see in the image. Sorry, I don't think I put the image up. Let me just do that now. Sorry about that, didn't press share. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So as we see in the prayer here, some of us are very familiar with it. Before we recite the prayer, we visualize Shakyamuni and just try to feel this radiance of his holy body, golden, translucent. When we recite the Refuge prayer, we just take a moment to try and think about either the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. In this case, since we're trying to visualize, feel the presence of Buddha, feeling like he's like the rays of the sun. But what hooks us, hooks the blessing of the Buddha, is our kind of own faith, our own openness to the Dharma. As we're going to see in this class, it's like a lens, it sort of focuses that power of the Buddha's blessing. So when we think about the quality of the Buddha, that he embodies Sangha, in this term Sangha, at the beginning of the prayer, that means that he's removed all the faults. It's huge, removing all the faults of the mind, anger, attachment, especially the deep ignorance that perceives reality as distorted, dualistic. So Sangha meaning removing the faults and also simultaneously having developed all the qualities, all the enlightened qualities, wisdom and compassion, fully developed. So it's actually mind-blowing, when we see the limitations of our own mind, it's mind-blowing. That quality, that effort, diligence. So in some way we can feel, wow, it's amazing, just opening up with a sense of faith and appreciation. Wherever that starts, just that slight opening, or maybe it's a deeper opening. Taking refuge means we take refuge in that quality, external qualities that the Buddha has achieved, accomplished over many, many, many lifetimes. And we take refuge in our inner ability, our Buddha nature, Tatagarbha, our ability to awaken that. Confidence that we can awaken that too, with the right effort, diligence, and reliance on the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Then we recite the prayer. We'll do it once in Tibetan, twice in English. Sangye chodan sogi chognamna chanchu bardu danyi kyapsuchi dagi chen sogi be sonamgi drula penjir sangye drupar shog. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. We just recite a few times Shakyamuni Buddha's mantra. Again, visualizing golden light, just filling us up with the qualities of the Buddha, especially that diligence, to really achieve all the qualities up to enlightenment is quite mind-blowing, So when each one of us have that diligence, that effort, that inspiration that he had held many, many lifetimes, holding that inspiration, that focus and determination. So may we all receive that. We need that, so important as a part of our practice. Tayada mune mune maha munaye soha. Tayada mune mune maha munaye soha. Tayada mune mune maha munaye soha. Tayada mene maha menaye soha. Tayada mene maha menaye soha. So last week I left you with a question to think about. I don't know if anyone's thought about it a little bit more. I mean, I guess some of us answered it because we did introductions last week um, to the class. So some of us already answered that, why we're seeking a different type of refuge. So it's not just wondering if did anyone think about it a little bit more over the space of the week? Anyone want to share anything? John, did you have your hand up there? No? Okay, let's just go into class then.
I have
Anyway,
something to share, Venerable Angie.
okay, yeah, Ladan, just in a few sentences, then we'll get into class.
Yes, it's I don't know if it's directly to the refuge that I'm connected with in this, but sometimes when we talked about having like attachment to the something that they praise us or they don't like us, I think about that and it helped me a lot because I like renunciation of fame and other things. It helped me a lot. So I had some difficulty at work and I like directly thought about this and I said it doesn't matter if I do my work and it doesn't matter if they like or they don't like. And
It
yes,
helped. It helped your
it helped
mind.
a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Equalizing the eight world concerns. So, yeah, Ladan's just touching on, again, what we discussed last week. Maybe for Denise, you weren't here last week, but we're just touching on these eight worldly concerns, this kind of what we normally concern ourselves, when we're not sort of being not necessarily focus in a spiritual way in our lives, what we tend to concern ourselves with is these eight worldly concerns, such as seeking pleasure, money, comfort, reputation, especially the one of seeking like approval from others, that's a big one. Good reputation, people liking us, giving us, saying nice words to us. That's quite hard, when people don't like us, when we don't get approval from others, especially like family members, people we work with. So again, in the Buddhist tradition, there's a way to transform that, to develop our mind so we know we can't rely on that. It's not a source of refuge. It's not something we can trust ourselves on to bring about happiness. So last week we just discussed a little bit the limitations of that. So what we do is we lean upon our spiritual practice, our ability to transform our mind, especially relying on, as a basis of the spiritual practice, the three objects of refuge. And also there's other exercise, especially thinking about, death and impermanence, precious human life, the nature of samsara. So this is kind of when we lean on the Dharma teachings to really develop our mind so we no longer seek that approval. Our mind doesn't go up and down when people like us or don't like us, say something good, say something bad. When we get material gain, we don't get material gain. There's a level of mind that we can develop that's way, way beyond that. Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to always say, Milarepa, who we've all heard of, this great holy enlightened being, gave up everything, to serve his guru around, I think, 11th century. And I mean, he gave everything to his guru to develop this mindset. And at the end, you know, towards the end of his practice, you know, Rinpoche would say, you know, he didn't have 1 rupee. I don't know if it was rupees they had in Tibet at that time, but Rinpoche always used the term 1 rupee. He didn't have 1 rupee, one possession, but what he had is the wealth of spiritual realization. You know, so he didn't need that. His mind was filled with joy, peace, happiness, you know, and of course he'd understood the nature of reality. So it's possible we can't go beyond all that right now, but what these teachings, you know, say to us, promise us that if we do the right, we practice the right way, we transform our mind slowly, slowly into the Dharma, we can go beyond, you know, the temporary, you know, relying on the temporary appearances of this life that can't satisfy us. It's possible with these practices. So it's very exciting, you know, it's possible through, you know, this potential we have for liberation and enlightenment. So it's a step-by-step process in mental transformation. We can't, you know, as I say, I think I mentioned this example before in the early days when, you know, we're very lucky now because, you know, when the Dharma first came to the West, all the students that I know, the young students of the 70s, all the hippies who went to Copan. I mean, there was only a few books translated into English, and one of them was the great, you know, the life story of Milarepa. So everybody was so inspired, you know. He gave up everything to serve his guru, and you know, even, you know, like, you know, he's giving up his life, his body, his possessions, everything to serve the teacher. So it's an incredibly inspiring story. So I think one student came to a course, you know, and they were dressed in like a bit like the Indian sadhus as well, you know. He had this like very thin cloth on. That's all he was dressed in. And he was a hippie, you know, hippies did that, you know, like we're living minimally and look at us, we're sort of, we don't care, we've given up this life kind of thing. And Rinpoche said the cloth was so thin that you could see through his robe, you know, what he was wearing. And Rinpoche kind of laughed, you know. And he said, you know, of course we read, you know, in the early days there weren't much books available, so we didn't really understand, well, what is renunciation? It's not just giving up stuff and then we're renounced, you know. It's not that at all. It's a very much an internal process which really have revolves around gaining a very strong faith and confidence in the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and feeling that we can develop that in our mental continuum, those qualities. And through that gradual transformation and unifying our mind with the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, renunciation just, it happens, you know, naturally happens. It's not about and of course, you know, until our mind's developed, we will still feel praise and criticism. I mean, we need to work on these things, you know, it's an inner development. As it was in the case of Milarepa, you know, he just happened to have not much, you know, and whatever he gave to his teacher. And even then, his teacher took a long time to give him teachings, you know, he had to do a lot of purification in order to receive teachings. So again, just to emphasize, it's a step-by-step process. Each of these, you know, just every time we hear them, hopefully we get a little bit deep, you know, a little bit insight. You know, our insights just grow and grow. You know, so that's the process of this path. You know, step by step insights. So class 2, what we're going to do here is a deeper dive into why we take refuge, the 2 causes of refuge, what they are. You know, how we bring about the causation of refuge in our mental continuum, how we experience that. What's the experience of that when we meditate? How does that come about in our mental continuum, that experience, that kind of realization, that feeling? So the 2 causes of refuge. So first one, this is always a bit tricky because, you know, we all have fears. Some of them are more valid than others, right? Our fears and anxieties are often more valid than others. So the first fear, you know, so when we talk about fear, it's a little bit tricky because we don't want to get sort of like paranoid. It's not a paranoid fear, an unbalanced fear. It's what we call a wholesome fear. This first one, you know. So the first one is a fear of, so yeah, so 2 causes, fear of suffering pertaining to the 3 levels of capable beings. And the second one is a faith and confidence in the 3 jewels to protect us from these fears. So again, we're going to go into this a bit more deeply. So first one, fear of suffering pertaining to the 3 levels of capable being. So The first one is the first capable being, this lower capable being. Fear is suffering in the lower realms. So again, just saying that this is a healthy fear. Each one of these are what we call a healthy, wholesome fear that actually protect us from danger. Protect us from a fear. A wholesome fear is something that protects us from something that's not good for us. Yeah. For example, I saw one example of, if we were just decided we wanted to go, for a walk in the forest or something, and somebody told us, don't go into that place, into that cave there or that area there because there's dangerous animals in that part. So just walk on this side of the forest. Well, you'd have fear of that. So you wouldn't walk on that in these areas where there's might be snakes or, some kind of other dangerous animals. That's a fear that would cause you to go in a different direction. So it's a kind of fear. So this kind of fear is a one that inspires us and with wisdom guides us in a wholesome direction, away from that danger. So the lower realms, of course, some of us, we may not have some deep conviction in the existence of the lower realms. But it's always say, there's so many places, I mean, especially right now in this world, there's so many areas where it's like we wouldn't want to be there right now. War zones. We wouldn't be at any place where there's like direct harm for the elements going on. Places where there's a huge amount of poverty. So the lower realms very much exist to a certain extent, but not to the extreme extent of the lower realms when you read about them in the Lam Rim. But to an extent, they all exist in this realm, yeah? As like people live in hells, people live in hunger, people live in thirst. We already see the animal realm. We're in connection with that. Okay, we have pets, they have a relatively in some level, comfortable life, but there's many, there's a huge, the vast amount of animals live in fear and challenge and difficulty, mostly fear of being eaten, by other animals. They mostly live in fearful environments when they live in the wild. So unless you're one of the powerful animals, you're living with a level of fear of being eaten all the time, whether it's in the air, whether it's in the water, whether it's on the land. This is the three places where animals exist, So, again, this takes a little bit of reflection and meditation, but, for some of us, we've already done that. So we do have some conviction that we wouldn't want to be reborn in that place. So one way that we take refuge, when we recite the refuge prayer, what we're kind of called upon to do in the practice of refuge is think about the lower realms a little bit. Think about the places you wouldn't want to be reborn. Again, this is all on the basis that we have continuity consciousness. Our consciousness has to go somewhere next life. If we have a little conviction in that, the experience of continuity consciousness doesn't cease at the death time. If we have a little bit more deeper reflection on reincarnation, then we have to think, well, where are we going to be going? What does that look like? So if we love ourselves, as we say in the West, if we have compassion for ourselves, we don't want to put ourselves in that kind of situation. It's like taking care of your child almost, you want to make sure, even when we have children, I mean, when they're younger, we want to make sure, conventionally they have a good job, good place to stay. Anyone we care about that, we want that and we absolutely want it for ourselves. So similarly, one of the causes of refuge is this kind of recognizing that there's this danger. There's a certain probability, depending on the actions we've created in this life, the karma we've created, there's a chance we could be reborn in the lower realms. And we don't know especially when it's not easy to control our mind at the death time. If we have a lot of sickness, we die suddenly, so one of the causes of refuge, it says, we're going to go into the benefits of refuge. One benefit is by taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, having some experience of that, it protects us for the lower realms. Having awareness that that's a danger. Lama Zopa Rinpoche always said as well, when it's a bit similar like when Rinpoche said when he was younger, many times they had to walk across really dangerous mountain passes. His uncle was his main sort of kind of protector when he was younger. and he took care of him for, for quite some years. And they had to walk often across really dangerous mountain passes in the Himalayas. So as soon as they got to the really dangerous ones, when there was a lot of rock falling, they would immediately start reciting mantras because it was a danger, right? So they took refuge. They would recite the Padmasambhava mantra. That was the Enigma practitioners up in the Himalayas predominantly. So they would take refuge in Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, and they would recite the mantra and really single-pointedly when there's a when there's a danger, they take refuge. So it's a bit like that. So if we familiarize ourselves, and again, this takes a little bit reflecting on the nature of samsara, the nature of the probability, the possibility that our conscious, we're not always in control of our minds. We get angry sometimes, we do attachment, sometimes pride, jealousy, certain states of mind can project us into the lower realm, certain karmas. So it's good. It's not being paranoid or like overly fearful. It's just an awareness that that's a danger. Like an awareness that we don't go a certain part of the forest when we go out for a walk because that part's dangerous. There's dangerous animals there. There's insects or bugs that could bite us, whatever. So with that wisdom, we don't go there. So it's actually it's very clarifying to the mind. So last week, because all these fires that are happening in LA, we had a lot of winds here at Vajrapani. And I don't think I've been here since I've been here. There's never been such strong winds. They were about 50 miles an hour, and my house is completely surrounded by trees. So I woke up quite, I was a bit afraid, and also I'm on a piece of the land where there's no one else at the moment. So I was like, oh my gosh, woke up about midnight and it's going, whoo, these amazing winds, strong winds, just blasts. And one tree fell down quite close to my house. I mean, it was in the opposite direction, fortunately, because the hill goes down away from my house. But it was really it was this kind of practice of like, well, this is really the awareness of like having a danger, an immediate danger and taking refuge. So I got up and I thought, well, I could put my headphones on and just forget it's there. But I thought, well, maybe more better to just kind of experience this kind of fear and then taking refuge. So I did some Tara mantras, I did some other prayers, but it makes your mind very alert. And I think that's the purpose of these meditations, to kind of make our mind alert. When we meditate in death and rebirth, the lower realms, it's like we need to recognize that, it brings us clarity to the mind. Lama Zopa Rinpoche would also say that if we could, so again, Rinpoche, as many of us know, he didn't very rarely rested or slept. He didn't lie down for, much at all. And one time a student, sort of young student, asked Rinpoche, well, why don't you sleep, And Rinpoche said, well, if you saw the mind of a dog, an animal, I don't know if he said a dog or an animal, or maybe another type of animal, but generally speaking, the mind of many of the beings in the animal realm, you wouldn't be able to sleep for fear that you would be reborn there. So it's something to think about. I mean, again, even after many years of practice, I can't say I'm there. I'm there at that level of clarity and realization. But I do have an awareness that I wouldn't want to be born in those places, because there's so many limitations with that rebirth. And it's also a fearful rebirth. And so that was Rinpoche's insight that he shared with one student. So I find it really helpful just to think about what that would be, how that would look like. So that's it. So again, this is pertaining to the 3 levels of capable beings. So the second capable being, fear of one's own suffering, this is the middle capable being. We should seek refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha because we have like what we develop here, you see, as a kind of an aversion. So the middle scope, which we haven't covered in this series yet, we'll go into the middle scope actually with Venerable Sangye Kadro, I think around April, May. You'll be studying that with Venerable Sangye Kadro, but we already understand to a certain level, the sort of power of delusion in the mind, that we are under the control of karma and delusion, that we don't see reality of ourselves and others directly. So this creates this whole bundle of suffering on top of it because of that. So I think we all have a little bit sense of that already. So When we go into the level of the middle capable being teachings, that scope, what we develop is this fear, or even if we don't want to use the word fear, this awareness, this deep awareness and sensitivity to our own suffering as samsara, how attachment, it kind of the suffering nature of that, the suffering nature of anger, and especially like sort of getting a bit more deeper insight as we go into the emptiness, or the ignorance, how ignorance pervades the mind, and how it creates all the different types of suffering. So what we're trying to develop here is that it's on the basis of having a sensitivity to a sort of beginningless samsara, that we've been reborn many, many, many times. We've never not had consciousness. We've never not experienced. We've just had different lives and we've just had different personalities, different bodies. But that's a continuity that's been going on from the Buddhist perception, from enlightened mind, from beginningless times. So in the second, so we take refuge in the Buddha and Dharma and Sangha with a sort of deep understanding of the evolution of our own samsara, and that we don't want to experience it again. We want to get out of that. That's the second sort of cause of refuge. With that understanding, our refuge gets deeper. So each time we take these fears, it kind of deepens when we understand these, that we could be born in the lower realms, that we have this kind of deep nature of suffering that we've carried with us, like the boulder, something on our back, heavy backpack of suffering. It's on our consciousness for life to life, we want to release that. We want to release ourselves for that. When we have a deep sensitivity to that, then our refuge gets deeper because we take a deeper refuge in the Buddha, who's freed himself of that, the Dharma, the teachings, the medicine we need to ingest, and the spiritual community that really nurse and support us through that practice. So that again, there's a deeper level of refuge that happens in our mind. Rinpoche used to use the term, it's a bit like the sense we get here, it's a bit like when we understand the evolution of our own samsara, when we feel it deeply, we have a realization of that. It's a little bit like feeling we're in the middle of a burning house and we need to escape. Or in terms of samsaric pleasures, Rinpoche used to use this term, just constantly seeking sort of samsaric pleasures that don't bring about satisfaction, that are really in the nature of dukkha. He would say it was like using used toilet paper. I mean, we don't have interest in used toilet paper, right? So for holy beings, they don't have any interest in temporary pleasures, they understand the nature of the suffering of these temporary pleasures, the eight worldly concerns. So they have, they're invested more in the joy of liberation. They've already experienced some of that through what you develop in this level in the middle scope. What's another name for this mind? What is this mind having a fear of samsara? What realization is that? Having a sort of deep, intuitive understanding of your nature of samsara. What aspect? I think probably Urs, and maybe if anyone want to guess, like there's these different realizations that we're trying to develop. So what one would this be when you have a very deep sensitivity to your own suffering, an aversion to it almost, like I don't want that anymore and I need to seek what brings about joy and happiness and everlasting peace. What's that realization? Just looking to see if anybody would put their hand up. Joe, yes?
Well,
It's not a long explanation, Joe. It's just a couple of words.
Sorry. Listen, I don't know where the last week's gone. I have no memory of it. So, wisdom realizing emptiness eventually.
Well, that's good. But this
renunciation.
One, there you go. Second time, right? Yeah, good. Yeah. It's the mind of renunciation. The mind that basically renunciation's it's one of these not comfortable words, because it's actually a very I think it's a really joyful mind, because instead it's a mind that's liberated itself, it's kind of freed itself from understanding the limitations of samsaric pleasures, that they can't provide any happiness. And it's kind of this joy and seeking of liberation. You know, this joyful mind that seeks liberation, very determined, focused mind that seeks liberation. So it's a very free mind, actually. It's a mind that's developed an inner quality that's free. It's no longer bound by temporary pleasures, you know, temporary needs, the eight worldly concerns. And it's this, I mean, I can say it because I kind of, you know, of course you see it in the example of some teachers, you know, they're not bound by those things, but they have this joy, this clarity, this wisdom, you know. So it's not quite wisdom realizing emptiness, but it's a mind we need. It's a force, a mental force we need that then draws us, brings us to that harder realization of the wisdom realizing emptiness. So we need that power, we need that force of renunciation, you know. And we all have it to a certain extent. You know, we all have a little bit of it because we're here, you know, we understand to some extent we need spiritual teachings, you know. We all kind of get that some of these temporary pleasures they're not satisfying us, you know. We all have a little bit faith and connection and devotion in the Buddhist teachings, you know. So we have some of this. It's just that we have to continue deepen and work on it. So the last one, in terms of the fear, you know, fears of other suffering. So this is the kind of quality of taking refuge, causes of refuge at the level of the higher capable being. And again, that's when we go in to study bodhicitta, wisdom realizing emptiness, in the high, you know, the later topics in the module. So in these classes, fear of others. So they could say a fear of others suffering in samsara. Well, again, the analogy is, you know, just imagine you know you're what's the analogy again? You see your, you know, you might be, you know, you all, you know, maybe you're walking along around the, I can't quite remember how it's, maybe I'm not going to get this analogy correct. Let me think about that one for a while. But basically, it's when we acknowledge a deep sensitivity, when we have a deep sensitivity to our own suffering, the beginningless nature of that, you know, and then we direct that, how we're suffering, towards all beings, directing this, using it through equanimity, meditating on equanimity, realizing that just like me, all beings are in this state, you know, then I have to really free myself so then I can be qualified to liberate them, you know. So this is kind of the mind of a bodhisattva, you know. And also I have to, you know, I have to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness. It's the only way I'm fully qualified to benefit others. And with that quality, that wisdom quality, I need to develop the six perfections alongside that: generosity, morality, concentration, wisdom. I need to keep developing on the bodhisattva path. So I have the skills and the qualities and the abilities to be able to benefit others. So it's a bit like, I think there's some analogy of a mother, you know, you're like if you were walking along, you saw a mother, and then the child fell in the water. You know, you're walking along the side of maybe a dangerous river, and the child falls in, and you're observing, you see that the child falls in, but the mother just sort of leaves them. You know, you'd think, oh my God, that's like horrendous. You know, she doesn't go in to try and save the child. She just lets the child float away, possibly die, drown. It's a little bit like that for bodhisattvas. There's no way. There's no way. They see that we're drowning in samsara, and there's no way they can just let us be there. You know, that this sensitivity to our suffering. We don't have that sensitivity for others right now because we just haven't developed our mind in the causes of refuge and all the other parts of the path, but it's possible. But it's almost like, you know, like when you see, the other analogy is, you know, when you get something in your eye, you know, it's very painful. You feel that it's like really, really sensitive. So for bodhisattvas, their minds are so soft and sensitive that sentient beings suffering is like that to them. You know, it's like this constant something that we've got in the eye. They feel it very deeply. So that's and so because of that, you don't want others to suffer. You want others to get out of samsara. You take refuge. You kind of have a fear or a strong awareness of their suffering, and you seek refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, who've got all the qualities and realizations that you want to embody for other beings. So that's the three causes of suffering that we develop on the basis of a kind of fear, or I'm going to say right now, a deep awareness the sort of capable beings are the middle, the lower, middle, and higher capable beings. So the other cause of refuge, of course, is the faith and confidence. So along with those kind of realizations, or at least some insights into those qualities, then of course we know, well, we're not qualified yet. So we develop a faith and confidence in those who are, those who have achieved these qualities of realization. So Rinpoche's, sometimes you'll see different translations for, oh, I don't know what happened there. Something's missing from here. Okay, back to front. No, never mind, we'll just put them all up. So sometimes you see different translations for the 3 jewels. Usually it's the 3 jewels. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, where you might see if you come across FPMT materials. You may be listening to Lama Zopa Rinpoche teaching. Rinpoche uses it translated as the 3 rare sublime ones. So how we develop faith and confidence in the 3 jewels, the 3 rare sublime ones, is it's about, thinking about their qualities, meditating, reflecting, listening, and studying the qualities of them. So, just we're going to go into a deeper teaching next week on the 3 qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha individually. We're just touching on them this week. So in terms of why Rinpoche, one reason why Rinpoche would use something like the 3 rare sublime, and of course a jewel is something very precious, so those precious qualities, liberation, enlightenment, realization, that's what we want to develop in our mind stream. They're rich, they're precious, jewels showing that preciousness of that quality. Rinpoche calls them 3 rare sublime ones. Well, one reason could be because, the coming of a Buddha is very, very rare, and it's often compared to the rarity of an Udambara flower. So an Udambara flower is considered a sort of mythical bloom, although it does exist, but it's so rare that it's almost mythical. It appears very rarely, and it symbolizes the exceptional and frequent arrival of a Buddha or an enlightened being. It's said to only bloom once in every 3,000 years. And it's like a tree or flower or fruit called a Ficus ricomosa. And it blooms usually just before the birth of an enlightened being. So it bloomed just before the birth of Shakyamuni Buddha. And it generally tends to bloom as kind of showing a sign that a holy being is going to come to this earth. So kind of, it's like the Buddha's like this rare flower, he comes very rarely, it's the coming of a Buddha. The Buddha jewel is the ultimate refuge in the enlightened mind that is free of all faults and endowed with all sublime qualities. It's the final goal we seek to achieve. So again, when we do the refuge prayer, Sang, we use the, Sangye Chodang. Sangye, that is the word for Buddha. And the Sang refers to the awakening or clearing away of delusions, the obstructions that hinder our spiritual progress. So for a Buddha, they're completely clear. There's no more obscuration, there's no more delusion, there's no more purification to be done. So it's like the completely purified mind. And Gye refers to the expansion or development of good qualities such as wisdom and compassion, or as, the full development of those in terms of the example of a Buddha, the quality of the mind of a Buddha, someone who's fully purified and who's fully developed. So it's just a, little bit insight into Buddha jewel. What does that mean? So again, that's something very precious, something very, very hard to attain. Also, the Buddha contains the 3 powers. The Buddha jewel contains the power over the ego, power over selfishness, which is wisdom. So the main power that we develop over the ego is this wisdom realizing emptiness. As Joe was saying, we need to develop that wisdom to overcome the power of the ego. The other power that the Buddha embodies is this power of compassion, fully developed. And that is complete power over selfishness. There's not a slight hint or taste of selfishness in the Buddha's mind. And the other power that the Buddha has is the power itself. So within the qualities of compassion and wisdom, there comes this third power that has this particular power to lead all beings to enlightenment. And actually the Buddha has 10 powers. And I'll mention a few of them later, but that would take a whole class to explain them. But within the qualities in light and mind, there's 10 specific powers that the Buddha embodies. One of them, actually, to mention now, is the power over the ability to choose. As I mentioned in the death and rebirth class, a Buddha has complete control over birth and death. They're not bound by uncontrolled death. Even Rinpoche used to say that, as I mentioned about Lama Yeshe, he has control over death. He's on top of death. So a Buddha can at any time, decide when they're going to pass away, when they're going to manifest passing into parinirvana. Other power that they have is the power over mastery states in meditation. And one of the powers that I'm going to just mention here now is the power over to do whatever must be done in a particular situation. So one of the powers the Buddha had, this one power that was kind of shown throughout the life of the Buddha had this cousin. Some of us know Devadatta. So even at the time of the Buddha, of course, there was, if we read the life story of the Buddha, there's many, many stories of when the Buddha showed his power of compassion, power of love, and these different powers, innate powers we have due to the qualities realizations, power over life and death, power over, being able to do whatever action, benefit whatever level of sentient being needs, whatever teaching at any time, and so and all the time that Buddha showed his powers, it just increased the faith of the disciples, So, but there were times when the Buddha, was also threatened, and especially by Devadatta. So Devadatta, you could say, so even at the level of Buddha, he still had what you call maybe enemies or karma with other beings who didn't have the level of faith in the Buddha, who wished the Buddha harm, who had jealousy. And one was the example of Devadatta, the cousin of the Buddha. So he was like the thorn in the side of the Buddha. He was kind of jealous of the Buddha's fame, reputation, his powers, the amount of followers he had, and he always wished this for himself. So he did become a Buddhist monk. He was a follower of the Buddha for a time, but he mainly was jealous of the Buddha, and he kind of mostly saw Buddha as a false teacher. And he was generally seen as quite a divisive figure in the Buddhist, at the time when the Buddha was on this earth. He even caused a schism in the Sangha, breakaway group in the early days of when the Buddha was propagating the Dharma. So at one point, along with he actually, along with another king, backing of another king, he tried to kill the Buddha, and he poisoned an elephant with he gave him some sort of poison or alcohol poisoning, and the elephant became extremely wild and started to charge on the Buddha. The Buddha was out receiving alms, and he and the king set this elephant upon the Buddha, and even the arhats. So an arhat's not at the level of a Buddha. They have released themselves from samsara, but they don't have all the higher qualities and realization and powers of the Buddha. So even it says some of the arhats, some of his disciples kind of flew off. They were so scared of the elephant. They didn't have the skill to be able to deal with the elephant. They didn't have the power of compassion that the Buddha had. And these particular type of powers. So, but again, I'm approaching the Buddha, the elephant, instead of trampling the Buddha, it became very calm and just kind of stopped and felt the presence of the Buddha's loving compassion. And it says that after this, of course, so many other beings were inspired. And after this, because there was a few other instances when the Devadatta tried to kill the Buddha, but after this, he kind of saw, okay, well, that's not going to work, so he gave up trying to kill the Buddha, but he still was a continual thorn in his side up to the day that Devadatta passed away. So again, these kind of stories, when we read them, they can be very inspiring, There's even a story about St. Francis, who also pacified, no one else was able to pacify this aggressive wolf that was kind of living in a nearby forest in a village and would come in from time to time and sort of kill and endanger the local village. And so it was only through the power of, it was St. Francis, because he was, you know, he's regarded even in this tradition as a bodhisattva, St. Francis of Assisi. Through the power of his compassion, he was able to go and able to communicate with the wolf and pacify the wolf, so he no longer endangered the village and the people there. So there are great, you know, there's many stories like that in the Buddha's life where he showed these kind of miracles, you know, being able to tame other beings through his power. So again, just by reading some of this, I mean, I find that's one of the most inspiring ways, you know, to develop faith in the Buddha, is reading, you know, some of the activities he did in his life, throughout his life as a Buddha, of course, reading the teachings, and then also reading some of his past lives, Jataka tales, you know, of how he traversed the bodhisattva path, how much self-sacrifice he did in order to develop realizations. So just a slight taste, you know, generating faith in the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel. So the Dharma jewel is the actual or practical refuge for us in our current state, since it includes the teachings and realizations that we need to cultivate in our minds in order to attain the ultimate goal of Buddhahood. So this is, again, just showing jewel, you know, the preciousness of the Dharma. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche, this is a picture. I used to live with this monk, Venerable Sering. He's now in Kopan, but he was a monk in the early days at Kopan, and he came to live in Aptos. I lived at Lama Zopa Rinpoche's house in Aptos. And Venerable Sering lived there for 20 years, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche gave him the job, his job for enlightenment. Lama Zopa actually said to him, this will take care of you all the way up to enlightenment. His job was to, because he was very good at calligraphy, he was an artist and had beautiful handwriting. So his practice was to write the Prajna Paramita, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. In this case, there's 8 volumes. So he's writing, it takes for each volume takes about 4 or 5 years to complete in gold. So he's writing them. I think he's on about the 4th or 5th volume now. He's just continually doing it with great devotion, you know, and it's wonderful who he talks about this practice, how it's transformed his own mind into, from him, more faith and devotion in the Dharma, you know, by doing this practice. So like that, you know, it's just showing, and even Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself, he would write, before he manifested the stroke, and he wasn't able to write easily with his right hand. But before that, he would through the night, Rinpoche would, you know, write the Prajna Paramita on gold. So what it's showing is, you know, this preciousness of the Dharma, you know, this preciousness, this rarity. And in context of 3 rare sublime ones, this rare quality, you know, it's not easy to hear teachings on emptiness, you know. I mean, we're very lucky we have an openness to that. Joe, I'll get your question in a little bit, if that's okay. He has an openness. We're very fortunate to have an openness to this. We can see it's rare. I mean, among our family members, among our friends, you know, many people just don't have that curiosity, that you know, interest. So for us just to kind of have a sensitivity to some extent to our own suffering, some level of renunciation, and some faith in the Dharma jewel, it's already unbelievable, amazing, you know, because it's not easy, you know, just to even open up a little bit of faith in that and interest in that. So again, Dharma jewel just expressing, showing that interest. And Venerable Sering here has practiced, you know, writing it in gold, showing the preciousness of that realization, creating merit in his own mind stream to develop that realization. And of course, when you have, you know, wisdom realizing emptiness, the other realization of bodhicitta becomes easier, because you directly see the confusion of all sentient beings, you know. So then you directly feel more deeply and see and feel more deeply the suffering of others. So it kind of emboldens you, you know, it gives you a lot of energy to develop bodhicitta, the different levels of bodhicitta, and really free yourself at all the different levels of obscurations. Sangha jewel, again, just a little bit in a nutshell tonight. With proper reliance on the Sangha jewel, we can be assured that our application of the Dharma will lead to the results that we seek. Sangha literally means community that lives and joins together. You know, so that's one level of Sangha. Sangha's a Sanskrit term, you know, for community that lives and joins together. The Tibetan term just elaborates a little bit more on the, you know, the meaning of the Sangha, you know, that jewel. The word for it in Tibetan is Gendun. And what it means is those people or things that are intent on a constructive goal. Gen is constructive and dun means intent. So it's more like a community of people, you know, who are intent on something very constructive. And in this case, they're intent on liberation and enlightenment. Or we could say coming for that mind of renunciation. You know, we have a level of renunciation and we're intent on developing, freeing ourselves of suffering and the causes of suffering. You know, we have that's an intention that's the thread of our lives, you know. Ideally, the thread of our actions, you know, to liberate ourselves from suffering and the causes of suffering. And we share that goal. We're all intent on reaching that place together. So the Buddha's vision, you know, was to have a fourfold Sangha. So, of course, and there's different levels of Sangha. There's relative and ultimate Sangha that we'll touch on more deeply next week. But the Buddha, you know, when the Buddha achieved enlightenment, you know, and he started to develop disciples. So his vision became to have what he called a fourfold Sangha. And that was made up of ordained monks and nuns, and also male and female lay precept holders. So those female practitioners, you know, that are abiding in, they're called, you know, lay precepts. He believed that this community, this fourfold community, would allow him, you know, allow the Buddha to, the Dharma to flourish, and also him to relieve, you know, also to help him relieve the suffering of all beings, you know, support the Buddha as well in that task and that mission. I mean, you can see, like, I use this picture here, you know, because through the kindness of Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you know, Western Sangha have developed, both ordained and lay, you know. It's like we grow naturally around holy beings or saints, you know, a Sangha naturally develops around a holy being or a saint. You know, we become inspired by their qualities and we want to follow in their example. We want to develop as they have, you know, all their qualities. An analogy is like a constellation. The Buddha is like the brightest star, and the Sangha members are the surrounding stars. They connect and contribute to the overall brilliance of that being. So that's why the Buddha wanted to develop a Sangha, you know, because they also, you know, they also support that holy being. There's an interconnectedness there. Like each individual of the Sangha is like a branch connected to the tree trunk, which is the Buddha. And teachings and the teachings and each other sharing the nourishment and supporting each other, just like, you know, a huge tree, you know, that it's the whole process. And that's why I like this example, because we're actually standing under, can't see it very well in the picture, but we're standing under this huge tree, you know. So different parts of the branch, we all support each other, you know, the nourishment and the flourishing of that tree, you know. So the three jewels support and nourish each other, and support and nourish us in a certain way, you know, for our spiritual development. Jo, did you want to ask your question? Does it work to ask it here? Mm-hmm.
Yes, going back to the Buddha's cousin,
Yes.
Devi Datta, is it possible to view him as a very holy being as well? Because if he hadn't have played the role of adversary to the Buddha wouldn't have had the opportunity to show people the power and the wisdom of bodhicitta.
Well, we're going to finish a bit. We're going to talk. As we go into the class, we'll see what happened to Devadatta. Might answer your question. Well, in one level, that's true. You can think of the kindness, but there was many, many other opportunities where the Buddha did display miracles, you know, in terms of healing others and just guiding others in the path, you know, showing the level of his realization. To see him as a holy being, I think more what we see him as an example of an unfortunate example when you don't, you consumed by jealousy and pride, you lose an opportunity to develop your faith. It's like it's not really so he's an
But
example. It's almost like an example. You could say through the kindness of the Devadatta, I understand how not to practice, Because
but I'm wondering whether he had a kind of, before he incarnated, a kind of intention to help the Buddha, to to give him opportunities to yeah,
show his powers.
well, just I don't know, because maybe they'd had an agreement that they would work together like that, so he was actually making a huge sacrifice.
Sometimes that is the case. I don't know if that's not the kind of in this situation, it's not the kind of teaching that we take away from this particular situation with Devadatta. It's more about you kind of understanding what happens when you don't develop faith and you have qualities of sort of pride and jealousy, how they can harm you. But maybe in the larger scale, he was an emanation showing that. There can be examples of that when
That's what I think. I think
yeah.
he contributed to the teachings.
hmm He definitely did. And whatever we take, whatever I guess, in these stories, you can take what inspires your mind from. If it inspires your mind in a positive way, helps to develop your mind in a positive way. I mean, you can take many messages from a story or a situation, yeah, as long as it moves your mind in a wholesome way in a positive direction. So faith, when we're talking about faith here, so there's different types of faith that I just wanted to touch in here, because we're talking about these causes of refuge, the causes of refuge are developing this fear or a deep awareness of the nature of samsara, a deep sensitivity to our suffering, our deep sensitivity that we can be born. We don't know where our consciousness is going to go, we need to be really aware of that. The more we study and practice Buddhism, develop that insight and awareness. And then also this kind of sensitivity that all beings are in the same situation. So that these three develop, then we can get a deeper level of refuge. And then understanding the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we start to develop faith. So how does faith develop? Well, they talk about three different levels of faith. Faith and confidence in the three rare sublime ones are the three jewels. The first one is a sort of clear or admiring faith. And I've used this image here of the three flowers, because there's three types of faith, and each one of them, it's like our heart opens, our whole being opens like a flower opens, we start to blossom like a flower in our faith and our openness, our entrustment to the teachings, our refuge in the teachings, our conviction in the teachings opens like that. First one is we gain an admirational confidence for the holy beings when we start studying the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and start understanding what they can do. So that's the first level of faith, an admiring faith. As we've done, we come here and we listen to the teachings and we're like, wow, that's quite amazing, that's really interesting, that's kind of the first level, when there's this curiosity there. Clearing or admiring, we admire the qualities, we admire the teachings, we think, oh, that sounds quite, that's really interesting. A sort of happiness starts to open in our mind, a receptivity to the advice and the instructions, so that's a sort of clearing. This receptivity to the teaching starts to blossom in our mind. That's the first level of faith that Venerable Children nicely explains there, Then our faith goes to the next level, inspiring or wishing faith. We not only admire the qualities of the holy beings, but we start to aspire to become like them. Our minds are enthusiastic. We see our potential and want to develop that potential. It's an open and joyful state of mind that makes us willing to learn and willing to practice. Sometimes I'll call it's like we're starting to come into the sort of honeymoon period of the Dharma. It's like, wow, this is really amazing. Because we're just so, we start to feel this joy in the teachings, how wonderful it would be if I could be like the Buddha, if I could even develop a semblance of that quality. So I used this example here. Pilgrimage needs faith. The more faith, the more happiness. Otherwise, you're just like a tourist looking at the ruins, you know? So it's a bit like that with the teachings, you know? Of course, we come along in the beginning. We're not expected to have faith. Nobody's asking us to have blind faith. You know, and we're not going to have that as Westerners anyway. There's little chance of that. Blind faith can come not really later, but it can be kind of doing your prayers by rote, not really putting a lot of feeling or thought or contemplation into them. That can come after the honeymoon period and meeting the teachings, where mind gets a bit apathetic, you know. So there's a danger of that. But in the beginning, not, you know, we're not going to have that, you know. Sorry, apathetic or blind faith. That doesn't happen. But we also don't want to, you know, as we engage more in the teachings, we don't want to just be like a tourist, you know, just like sightseeing, you know. I think I'll go to that class and try out and see what it's like. Oh, I've heard this before. We can get this sensitivity, insensitivity to the Dharma, which is quite dangerous. When we go to a teacher and think, oh, well, I've heard that before, you know, I know that, I know about death and rebirth, I know that we're going to reincarnate, you know, nothing new there. That's what we call an insensitivity to the Dharma. So, and it can almost be like you're just sort of listening for the sake of or sort of sightseeing, you know. So we have to really purposely cultivate this kind of strength of faith, you know. So the second level is aspiring or wishing faith, and it's really joyful, it's really childlike, you know, but a good childlike, being like a child of the Buddha, you know, being aware that we have so much to learn and being happy in that place. So it takes some effort, that for sure, you know. Something we can take is aspiring bodhisattva vows, you know. So as I say, you know, on the basis of refuge, we can take vows, you know, lay vows, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows, and they often say in the beginning it's better to take, you know, we start off by taking aspiring something bodhisattva vows, generating this wish to become enlightened for all sentient beings and taking these vows to train in bodhicitta. So aspiring means we're not engaging in them yet, but we have this wish, this kind of energy, inspiration that how wonderful it would be, you know, if I could really train like that. And then on that basis, we study and reflect in the teachings more till we reach a point where we feel like, okay, I'm going to take that commitment to really train that way. So that's again this level at the level of aspiration. Then the other level of faith, the third level is convinced faith or faith of conviction. So this is again comes more deep, you know, when we develop this faith that we really understood something through faith and through, you know, so we've all probably had hopefully some experience of that through listening to the teaching, maybe through karma, you know. We get like a deeper conviction through our meditation, so the faith of conviction really only comes through this, you know, the threefold practice of listening, reflection, and meditation. Those three is what develop our faith. That's a healthy development of faith through listening, reflecting on the teachings, whatever they are, and then, you know, some sort of meditation or inner deeper reflection on that, and then a type of conviction comes. So it's a really, really, you know, it's an even deeper level of faith and conviction in the teachings. We're fully engaged. And again, we can see that in many holy beings, you know. It's really that kind of development of faith, entrustment, determination that makes realization possible. You know, any realization, any spiritual development is the power of faith, you know, that really kind of transforms the mind, you know, into whatever quality we're meditating on. Like Milarepa, so much faith in his guru, you know, and the qualities that the guru held, not the guru's a being, but the qualities that he felt were embodied in his guru and his own faith and his potential to achieve enlightenment. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you know, incredible faith in his teachers, you know, incredible faith and so inspiring. Rinpoche had so much faith and devotion, you know, and unbelievable. And even I would say, you know, even in Tibet, you know, what happens, you know, why the Chinese are in despair almost, because the Tibetan people, you know, they have this deep faith in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. They have this deep faith in His Holiness as the embodiment of Chenrezig. And it doesn't matter what the Chinese do to them, it doesn't alter that faith, you know, and it gives them so much hope and great times of despair, So it's very powerful faith. But again, we don't want to have blind faith. We don't want to have faith that's, how would you say, we see what faith can do in, the wrong type of faith when it doesn't embrace all beings, with compassion, can be very destructive in this world as well. So, we need to develop this sort of healthy faith in the teachings, healthy faith in the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and that's what we want to develop, Again, being convinced you have more faith or confidence in it. When you have more confidence, your mind is more open and subtle. You can understand things easier. In turn, your knowledge and understanding increase. So this is just some of the benefits of faith, And again, it all comes, and certainly for me, like really reading the life, the qualities that, as we do in this module, we study the qualities of the Buddha. There's some examples in some of the readings of some of the feats that the Buddha did during his life, how he exemplified the inner qualities outwardly, among the students, disciples, the Sangha. So, that's how we, and as Venerable Thupten Chodron says, when we have more faith, our mind's more receptive. Much more receptive to the teachings as we become like, I know it's a bit of a silly picture there, but we become like a sponge, It's like we become more, it softens the mind, it makes it more subtle, and we're able to absorb the water, the nectar of the teachings. As our mind, develops this quality of faith, these three levels of faith, the teachings are able to penetrate our hearts. Rather than like our heart being a rock, like kind of not porous, like glass, metal, something hard, we want to be like the sponge, where our being, we're able to absorb the teachings. The compassion and blessings of the three jewels are inconceivable, but nevertheless, their ability to reach us depends on our faith and devotion. If you have immense faith and devotion, the compassion and blessings you receive from your teacher and the three jewels will be equally immense. So again, we don't start off with immense faith and devotion, but as it grows, that much more comparably, we'll be able to receive the blessings, the qualities, the inner realizations, the power of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, that much more our faith and conviction grows in them. Also, unrealistic expectations don't help, though. Again, this process of developing faith is very organic. So one example from my side in the early days, I mean, I always kind of had, quite early on, I would say I had quite a lot of conviction and faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, But of course, I still had to, you always have to nurture and develop it. That's a constant practice. But in the early days, I probably had a little bit unrealistic expectations because, I heard about enlightenment and liberation. I was so excited. I was doing prostrations and Vajrasattva, and I was thinking, I'm going to get enlightened here. I was so like thinking I'm going to get enlightened this life. I mean, I might do. Still, you never know. But I guess I had quite a lot of expectations. And I remember I'd only been a nun about a year. I'd met the Dharma about 3 years before. And I went to a teaching of His Holiness. And His Holiness, I don't, I mean, how many teachings I remember, I don't know, but you always remember the ones that really, it's somehow like, you don't throw it out completely, but it's like you don't quite get it. So somehow it sticks in your mind. So His Holiness said, and probably because I had a lot of expectation, he said, after 10 years of practice, if you find that you've got a little bit less anger, that's very good. Keep going. And I was like, pardon? That's all I'm going to get after 10 years. Um, I was expecting a lot more, So, but actually, I still feel after 10 years, there was a lot, I felt like I did have less anger, more patience, and, obviously more conviction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and other things, But, as I say, the development of our mind's a very organic process. We just need to keep going. Lama Zopa Rinpoche would say our faith and devotion act like a lens that allow us to receive the inconceivable qualities and blessings of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So, the Buddha's like the sun, his blessings are infinite. But we kind of need the lens of our own faith, our meditation, our practice, and that's the way that we really receive more directly, more specifically, the power of the blessings of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha in our hearts. You know, it's through the power of our faith that acts like that lens. As Patrul Rinpoche would say, he was also a great enlightened master from the Nyingma tradition. If your faith and devotion are just moderate, the compassion and blessings that reach you will also be moderate. If you have only a little faith and devotion, only a little compassion and blessing reach you. If you have no faith and devotion, you will get absolutely nothing. Well, there you go. So, but again, we have to develop our faith and devotion, but just being like that flower that's just partially open right now, it's huge what that is, that opening. That's huge already, how much we can receive. So, what time are we on now? We're getting to the end. Without faith, even the meeting the Buddha himself and being accepted as a disciple. So again, this is the other example, maybe as you're saying, Joe, this is what Devadatta showed us. Maybe he was a holy being and he showed us, you know, what happens when you don't have faith, when you have jealousy, competitiveness, when you kind of want to outdo your teacher. You know, there was examples also when Devadatta tried to outdo the Buddha to show he was more holy, more realized than the Buddha. So what happened to Devadatta was, and Devadatta was his cousin, so he was close to the Buddha, you know. So the other thing Rinpoche used to say, it doesn't matter how physically close you are to the teacher. If you're close like Devadatta was, you'll not receive any benefit, any blessing. The blessing, the power of the Buddha's blessing comes from our own faith, you know, not how close we are physically with the teacher or, you know, the Buddha, the teacher, the guide, you know. It comes through our mental development. I mean, as well as attempting to kill the Buddha, he also caused, as I said, a split among the Sangha, which is very heavy karma. So you know, at the very end of his life, there's a couple of different interpretations or stories I read, but towards the end of his life, it's said that he did develop a certain level of regret, but at that time he was very far from where the Buddha was. And of course, in that time, you couldn't send emails or, you know, even write letters, I don't think. So he had to walk, you know. So on his way walking towards the Buddha, he didn't get very far, and it says that he kind of fell down into a fiery pit. The earth opened up and he fell into the hell realms because his regret wasn't really that powerful. It was only because he got sick, you know, that he sort of developed a regret, but not really sincere, of having trying to harm the Buddha, split up the Sangha. I mean, there was a few different things he did. And it was said that he was seen just sort of, you know, the earth opened up and he sort of fell into the earth, into a fiery pit, into the hell realms. So you could see out the kindness of Devadatta. He showed us, you know, what happens when you don't, you know, you don't really sincerely practice and when you sort of challenge your teacher, especially creating heavy karma like trying to kill a Buddha, you know, that's incredibly heavy karma. So he entered the hell there. I don't know if he's still there or not, but that's what, you know, what happens when you don't have right faith. I mean, he was still a monk, you know, but it doesn't matter, you know, if you don't have the faith, you break commitments and vows with your teacher, you know, with the Sangha. Don't really understand the practice of Dharma properly, you know, it doesn't protect you. So this is kind of, yeah, this is what the common example you use of Devadatta, you know, how not to practice. So I just want, you know, for the last few minutes, is there any questions or comments? How are we doing with that? Because it's 25 past already. Anyone want to share something, anything they didn't get?
Sorry,
Angie, I'm really appreciative of your personal stories for us. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I thought it might help a little bit. You know, we're not all Buddhas yet by any means. We all go through our different phases in the path, you know. That's just part of it, you know, our learning process. And I guess as Sangha, you try and help people with what to do and what not to do, you know, where you want to go in the right way and where you don't want to go in the right way. And we all learn by our mistakes. Dana, you had your hand up?
Yeah, you mentioned something about precept holders, and I didn't really get what that was.
Well, a precept holder is someone who holds precepts, for example, lay precepts. So there's, you know, I hold precepts, I hold vows. You could say another word for that is vows, you know. So I hold vows, you know, celibacy, no killing, stealing, lying, you know, I hold 36 precepts or vows. So as a lay practitioner, you know, I'm ordained. And as I said, the Buddha developed the fourfold Sangha. So lay practitioners as well as ordained practitioners. So as lay practitioners, you can also be vow holders. But you can only take vows on the basis of having taken refuge. So you go through a short ceremony and you actually decide, okay, I want to be Buddhist, and I see the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha as my spiritual refuge. And then at a later point or at the same time, you might decide you want to take precepts. There's 5 precepts you can take, life precepts you can take as a lay practitioner. Killing, stealing, no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, alcohol. Oh, sorry, I need to plug my computer in. I thought I didn't do it at the start. Probably got enough time, but I just got a warning. I don't want to just... So yeah, does that answer your question, Dana?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. It's just another term, I think. You probably
Right.
knew. Ladan, your question?
Yes, so
Ladan?
my question is about like the story of this cousin of Buddha reminds me the one thing that it's coming back to my mind over and over. It's like not haunting me, but I don't quite getting it.
Mhm.
I know that karma is not fate. Karma is not like your destiny. But sometimes when I see like the life I've been through, I have not been really like it's a great opportunity, chance to see like His Holiness, to have because it's not in my like family or my culture, or it's been quite something that I see, like the Rinpoche, or I'm interested in the Buddha's teaching. But sometimes I say, if it's like karma, if it's some cause and effect that's leading me into this path, what is my what is my really responsibility, or what is my role to have this faith, to take it and keep it, and the vows and everything. And sometimes as you said, I'm very enthusiastic, and sometimes when life is like not easy, you have to work, and and I'm like sleep away about of my day-to-day, like prostration or meditation or something, because I'm tired physically. So I said, this is like, maybe it's worst even that when you don't know about like Buddha's teaching. Do you understand? Like, you have the possibility, but sometimes it's complicated.
Yeah, it
Is it
is. I mean, as
fate?
a
Is
lay
it karma?
practitioner, it's not easy to practice when you have other responsibilities. I mean, I really admire lay practitioners, I mean, it's not easy. Nobody's saying it's easy, and it's hard, so it's you when you've got family, you've got jobs, you've got responsibilities, but we also want to make our practice joyful. You don't want to push where your mind's resenting the practice and this and that. So as a lay, you have to be very skillful in getting a balance in your life with these practices. Because we're running out of time, maybe I'm not, I mean, I'm also happy to talk to you about it, Ladan, but just make sure that you have a balanced normal life and spiritual life, I mean, of course, maybe, because we still work and all these things, you're not, but so you have to use your practice as a source of inspiration for your life, not as a drudgery, or I have to do this and I have to do that. And we do need to rest when we need to rest. I mean, we can't really meditate when we're exhausted, it doesn't really do much, maybe, but I don't think it does much for the mind, so it's not easy. You have to get a balance, and it takes a while to find that balance between our life and our spiritual life and our family and all the responsibilities, and still finding space for that. And and even as a new monastic, it was quite hard in the beginning, try to figure all that out. I was only in my 20s, I mean, I got I got a lot of loon, what you call them. It's like a wind disorder because I was pushing too hard as a new monastic, you know. And I didn't know the balance because I was still quite young. So I found it quite hard myself just to find my way as a new monastic. Similarly, when you meet the Dharma, it's like so exciting and there's so many things and you want to do it all. And a little bit, you know, effort and tiredness, that's all good. But we need to make sure we keep a sense of joy, you know, a sense of enjoying a practice. Because when you don't have that and you don't get a feeling of being nourished by your practice, you might give it up, you know. I've seen people do too much and they get too much lung or anxiety and they sort of can give it up. So yeah, and that's why you need Sangha, you know, just to kind of guide you and support you. And you need a community. For us, like the Sangha Jewel's almost like the most important. I'm not talking about me personally, I'm talking about having Sangha to talk and discuss together. How do you practice what's healthy and keeping it going and all these parts, you know, that are not easy. Anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. Okay.
Yes, a lot.
Yeah. So shall we just does anyone else, because we're sort of short on time, I thought we'll just do a quick dedication and to please continue on for next week with the reading in the 365 Days Lam Rim, the required reading. And again, if you have any questions as you're doing in reading, if you have time, please bring them to the class. I always enjoy questions. So let's just do two dedications so we can finish more or less on time. Developing it for the actualization of bodhicitta. So even if we don't know exactly what bodhicitta is, it's just like always having the good heart in our actions as much as possible. Praying for that, praying for all the leaders in this world. Those who have power especially, they need good hearts. So Rinpoche used to always pray for the political leaders to be guided by the good heart. Of course, you need wisdom too, but with a genuine sense of care for others. And for us to be guided in that in our life as much as possible. That's really kind of a nutshell what that prayer says. And then we can dedicate for His Holiness's long life and for all the holy beings, for all of us who are practicing virtue, trying to develop our mind in the path, develop a sense of refuge, you know, all the aspects of the Lam Rim, you know, getting some insight into each of these, you know. So for all of us, each one of us to have a long life as well, so we can continue in this precious human life as long as possible to, you know, train our mind in good qualities, the essence of the path. Chanju Senju Rinpoche, Mage Panam Gyurshik, Ye Panyampa Mepa Ye, Gonne Gondu Pelwar Shuk. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Okay, thank you so much for joining and hope you have a good week, safe week, joyful week as much as possible in the Dharma.
And you too. And thank you,
Thank you.
Bae.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Ash. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Isabella. Thanks.
Hello, Dan.
And I
Have a
hope you
wonderful
feel
week.
I hope you feel better,
Thank you.
Tommy.
Yeah.
I noticed you made it tonight, somewhere there. So I hope you feel better. I think Tommy wasn't feeling so great, but it's nice to see him tonight.
Slow
So
progress.
thank you, everyone. Good night.